The Helios Vanguard Academy had processed 72,000 recruits in this cycle alone. Its halls were carved into the metallic cliffs of Caloran Prime, overlooking a world built entirely for discipline, precision, and order. Generations of cadets had marched through its vast chambers, most carrying names that gleamed in the Orion Assembly's registries, dynasties of soldiers, engineers, and rulers who defined interstellar power. The Academy prized lineage and enhancements. Some recruits had skeletal reinforcements from birth, designed for combat endurance. Others had neural symbiotes humming in their skulls, ready to interface with warships before they had even spoken their first words. Even the unmodified cadets were wealthy, carrying genetic stability that money could purchase and status that no exam could measure. Nasir Kale Orion was none of these things. His file arrived late, transmitted from a forgotten Earth colony. No sponsors, no enhancements, no recorded family victories. A recruit who carried a surname with no banners hanging in any of the Academy's chambers. In the barracks, whispers carried faster than orders. Earthborn, still crawling on soil while we command the stars. His presence alone was considered an error, yet somehow he had been accepted. Some cadets muttered that a clerical glitch had slipped him in. Others insisted it was pity, a token to prove the Academy's doors were open to all. Joran Keth, a rival from the exalted Valen families, laughed openly in the mess hall. Earthborns still bleed when they trip on stairs, don't they? Maybe Argus will teach him how to walk before it teaches him how to fight. Kale didn't answer. He kept his gaze on the floor, clutching a training duffel so worn it looked out of place among the polished alloy trunks of his peers. To them, his silence was weakness. To him, it was survival. On the first evaluation day, cadets were lined in a gleaming hall that pulsed with the faint hum of Argus, the Academy's all-seeing intelligence. Each recruit stepped forward for scanning a ritual that measured aptitude, history, and genetic markers against the Assembly's endless databases. Most scans completed in seconds, badges assigned with precise efficiency. Scores appeared on hovering slates, and laughter or applause followed depending on the numbers. When Kale's turn came, even the overseer's expression flattened with disinterest. A recruit with no implants, no record, and no prospects would likely be dismissed before lunch. He stepped forward, placed his hands on the scanning console, and tried to steady his breath. The screen lit. Argus began its routine hum, a rays sweeping across his body. For a moment, the display filled with expected baselines. Then it faltered. The hum stuttered. Numbers scrambled across the slate in jagged bursts. Alarms flickered on the console, and then something changed. The first trial was designed to eliminate doubt. Recruits entered the combat dome, a seamless sphere of alloy and light, where holographic opponents materialized in shifting waves. The test measured adaptability, reflex, and tactical foresight. Victors earned commendations that carried through their entire careers. Failures were quietly reassigned to logistics, transport, or worse, returned to their homeworlds in disgrace. Kale stood at the edge of the dome, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Around him, cadets murmured with anticipation. Some sharpened their blades, others synchronized with implants, their eyes glowing faintly as their neural symbiotes aligned. Joran Keth smirked from the crowd. Try not to trip, Earthborn. The Academy floor is cleaner than the dirt you're used to. Laughter rippled. When Kale's name echoed across the chamber, silence fell. He stepped into the dome, duffel set aside, body rigid with tension. A shimmer cut the air, and the holographic enemy appeared. A tri-limbed predator armed with plasma hooks, its movements too fast for unmodified eyes. Kale raised the standard-issue shock baton, the weapon feeling heavy and foreign in his grip. The fight began. The predator lunged, hooks flashing. Kale swung clumsily, striking nothing but air. The crowd erupted in jeers. Each misstep drew louder ridicule. His balance faltered, his arms ached, and his defense collapsed in seconds. Within moments, the hologram struck his chest with a force pulse that sent him sprawling across the dome floor. Pathetic, Joran muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Even Argus will erase him after this. Kale struggled to stand. His baton clattered uselessly, hands trembling. The simulation reset for a second round, but he already knew what was coming. The predator struck again, faster, harder, unrelenting. The dome's sensors registered failure. A red emblem flared across the display. Test incomplete, candidate unfit. The overseer scribbled a note with a look of detached certainty. Around her, cadets smirked, satisfied that the Academy's mistake was about to be corrected. Kale's chest heaved, shame pressing harder than exhaustion. For most, the evaluation ended here. A dismissal order would follow. But protocol demanded one more step, the post-trial scan. Every recruit, regardless of performance, was to be processed by Argus. The intelligence collected far more than victory or failure. It measured patterns, anomalies, and deviations the human eye could not see. Kale wiped sweat from his brow and stepped forward once again. The same scanning console pulsed to life, its crystalline surface glowing with faint blue lines. His peers whispered behind him, eager for the final humiliation. Joran leaned close enough for his voice to pierce Kale's thoughts. Watch Argus confirm what we already know, that Earthborn should never have been here. Kale placed his palms against the console. Argus hummed, the surface vibrating faintly under his touch. Numbers scrolled across the display, steady at first. Then the hum faltered. Lights dimmed. Warnings blinked. For the second time in a single day, Argus hesitated. And hesitation was something it was never programmed to do. Argus had never paused. Not once in decades of service had the Academy's Sentinel intelligence faltered mid-scan. It processed thousands of recruits each week with mechanical precision, aptitude logged, scores assigned, results archived. Delay was impossible, yet the hum beneath Kale Orion's palms stuttered like a heart misfiring. Cadets shifted uneasily. Whispered laughter faded into silence. Overseer Myra Balin frowned and signaled to the technician on duty. Diagnostics? Rin Talvek, the Academy's systems officer, tapped rapidly across his console. No hardware faults, no signal disruptions. Argus is recalibrating. He hesitated on the last word because Argus did not recalibrate. It calculated. The console lights flickered. Symbols scrolled in patterns Rin had never seen. Not aptitude scores, not biometric readouts, but layered directives nested deep within legacy code. The air itself seemed to thrum as Argus processed something far beyond a routine evaluation. Kale tried to pull his hands away, but the surface locked him in place with a magnetic grip. He winced, jaw clenched, as the console drew more data than any recruit had ever yielded. His heart hammered louder than the machine's hum. Suddenly, the hall lights dimmed. A red glyph flared across the main display. Argus spoke in a voice that reverberated through the dome. Cold, synthetic, absolute. Designation: Orion, Kale. Status: Earthborn. Classification override required. The crowd leaned forward, confusion etched on their faces. Joran Keth snorted. Override, for him! The voice continued. Threat assessment, Omega. The words hit like a detonation. Overseer Valen straightened, eyes narrowing. Rin froze, fingers hovering above the console. Even the cadets who had mocked Kale fell silent, the meaning sinking in. Omega was not a score. Omega was a category. Argus, Valen demanded, her tone sharp. Define Omega classification. The AI paused, processing. Then, in the same cold cadence, it replied, Omega, existential level anomaly. Directive, immediate review by Assembly Authority. Gasps rippled across the hall. Kale's knees nearly buckled. He had expected dismissal, humiliation, maybe expulsion. Not a label that sounded like a death sentence. Joran forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. It's a glitch. Some error in the system. The Earthborn can barely stand. How could he possibly be a threat to anything? Rin's eyes, however, told another story. He scanned the lines of code cascading down the console. Old directives, fragments of language no modern officer should be able to read, buried beneath centuries of updates. And yet Argus had pulled them out, triggered by one unremarkable recruit. He looked up at Valen, his voice low. Director, this isn't a malfunction. Argus is running a protocol I've never even seen referenced. It isn't measuring him like a cadet. It's measuring him like a weapon. The overseer's jaw tightened. She glanced at Kale, pale, trembling, staring at the console as if it might swallow him whole. Around them, every cadet seemed to hold their breath. Then Argus spoke again. Advisory. Assembly review required. Classification sealed. Transfer to restricted channel. The console went dark. The hum died, and the silence it left behind was heavier than any defeat Kale had endured. The silence after Argus shut down lingered like a shadow. Overseer Myra Valen didn't move, her eyes fixed on the dead console. Cadets whispered in fragments, their voices tinged with fear instead of mockery. For the first time, Kale Orion wasn't the target of ridicule. He was the center of unease. "Clear the hall," Valen ordered at last. Her voice cut through the murmurs with the weight of command. Cadets returned to quarters. Officers remain. Reluctantly, the recruits filed out. Joran Keth hesitated, throwing one last sneer at Kale. "Omega! Enjoy it while it lasts, Earthborn. Tomorrow they'll call it a mistake." But there was no confidence in his voice, only a thin mask of bravado. Once the chamber emptied, only Kale, Valen, and Rin Talvek remained. The technician leaned over the inert console, scrolling through backup logs. His face paled as he skimmed the lines. "Director, Argus accessed restricted directives. These weren't supposed to exist in active memory." "Explain." Valen's tone was sharp. "They're assembly-sealed protocols. Omega designations are flagged for immediate escalation, not to Academy oversight, but to the Council itself." It bypassed every safeguard. Kale shifted uneasily. "What does Omega even mean?" Neither officer answered. Rin looked away. Valen's silence was more telling than words. Finally, she straightened, tapping her wrist comm. "Summon a secured chamber. Inform the assembly liaison. We have a classification breach." Kale's stomach turned. Classification breach. The words made him sound less like a cadet and more like a dangerous specimen. 2 armored guards arrived, their expressions neutral, but their presence unmistakable. One motion for Kale to follow. "Directive order, candidate. Restricted review." Kale hesitated. "Am I being expelled?" Rin met his eyes, something flickering behind his guarded expression. "No. If it were expulsion, you'd already be outside the gates." He paused. "This is worse." They marched him through corridors lined with holographic banners of Academy victories' legacies Kale had never been part of, victories Earthborn names had never claimed. Every step felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing closer. In the secure chamber, a circle of high-grade hollow emitters flickered to life. Transmission lines spiraled upward, connecting to channels Kale had never even heard of. Overseer Valen stood in the center, her posture rigid. "Begin transmission." The air shimmered. Figures materialized in pale light, members of the Orion Assembly, their forms hazy but their authority absolute. Each voice carried the weight of 100 worlds. "Director Valen," one intoned, "you have reported an Omega classification." "Yes," Valen replied evenly. "Triggered by recruit Kale Orion, Earthborn designation." The chamber fell silent. The figures regarded him, their gazes like blades. Another voice, colder, sharper. "Impossible. Earthborns were screened centuries ago. None remain viable." Rin cleared his throat. "And yet Argus confirmed. No errors, no overrides. It was deliberate." A third figure leaned forward. "If true, this breach extends beyond the Academy. The archives must be consulted." The word hung in the air, archives. Kale didn't know what it meant, but from the way every officer stiffened, he realized it was something forbidden. And he realized something else. Whatever Argus had seen in him wasn't just unusual. It was dangerous enough to frighten the people who commanded entire galaxies. The chamber's hollow emitters pulsed with a faint static glow as the assembly figures conferred in tones Kale could barely follow. Words like protocol breach and legacy safeguards cut through the haze, each one tightening the knot in his stomach. He had expected embarrassment, maybe expulsion. Not this, not the weight of entire worlds pressing on his shoulders. Director Valen's voice broke the silence. "Argus, confirm classification parameters." The Sentinel's tone was colder now, stripped of its routine cadence. Classification, Omega. Trigger source, Orion, KO. Data correlation, restricted files. Authorization required. Rin frowned. Restricted to where? The console flickered, lines of fragmented code flashing across its surface. A single phrase materialized. Archive access, denied assembly clearance only. The assembly figures stiffened. One leaned closer, his form crackling faintly with interference. Director Valen, do not pursue this further. Omega classifications traced to events sealed for a reason. Another voice countered, sharper, urgent, and yet the Sentinel has triggered. Ignoring it would constitute dereliction. The archives must be consulted. The debate rippled like a storm. Words clashed, caution against necessity, secrecy against obligation. Through it all, Kale stood motionless, his heart thundering. He didn't understand what archives they meant, or why his existence had activated them, but every look in the chamber told him the answer would not be simple. Finally, Valen spoke, her decision slicing through the argument. Initiate sealed access. If Argus references a correlation, we must verify, assembly, directive, or not. The holoemitters dimmed, reconfiguring. Encryption locks cascaded across the display, each one requiring multi-source authorization. The assembly representatives reluctantly raised their hands, symbols glowing as access keys intertwined. One by one, the locks dissolved, revealing a single dormant file system that had not been touched in centuries. The labels scrolled across the chamber wall in harsh red letters. Omega Protocol Extinction Safeguard. Kale felt his breath catch. The phrase meant nothing to him, yet the way it froze every officer in the room made his skin crawl. Rin swallowed hard. Director, these aren't just tactical records. These are contingency measures. The kind you activate when civilizations are at risk. One assembly figure leaned forward, voice grave. Recruit Orion has tripped safeguards meant for species-level threats. Earthborn bloodlines were not supposed to carry these markers. Kale's voice cracked as he spoke for the first time. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? Argus responded before anyone else could. Genetic resonance detected. Neural profile alignment, 97.8%. Subject correlates with legacy human directive signatures. Rin's hands shook as he read the output. Director, this isn't a mistake. He matches protocols tied to strategies humans were once feared for. If these records are correct, he hesitated, glancing at Kale, then Earthborn weren't forgotten because they were weak. They were buried because they were dangerous. The chamber fell into silence. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of Argus, waiting for further commands. And in that silence, Kale realized that whatever had been hidden in the archives, whatever legacy had been erased, was about to be unearthed through him. The chamber's lights dimmed as the sealed archive unfurled, its interface older than anything Kale had ever seen. The display projected fragments of text, diagrams, and battle logs written in languages half corrupted by time. Yet Argus translated them with cold efficiency, each phrase etching itself into the air with brutal clarity. The first line appeared. Omega Protocols, human-engineered strategic paradoxes. Rin Talvek's throat tightened. Paradoxes, that's not tactics. That's weaponized contradiction. Overseer Valen studied the diagram's grids of maneuvers that didn't resemble formations or strategies, but puzzles, loops of logic designed to collapse on themselves. They weren't winning battles through strength, she murmured. They were dismantling wars through impossibility. Another file loaded a battle record from centuries past. Hollow footage flickered across the chamber, fleets arrayed against human forces, outnumbering them 10-1. Yet the enemy ships drifted into chaos, firing at allies, supply lines collapsing without contact. The record ended with a single phrase stamped across the feed: victory, human strategic paradox deployed. Kale felt his breath falter. You're saying humans use tricks to confuse their enemies? No. Rin's eyes darkened. Not tricks. Systems collapses. They didn't just fight opponents. They made their very logic turn against them. The next file was worse. A campaign labeled the Syndral War. Logs described how human tacticians had introduced a recursive protocol into enemy command networks. The opposing fleet destroyed itself within 4 hours without a single human ship firing. Gasps rippled through the chamber. One assembly figure's voice cracked as he spoke. This is why they were erased. The other civilizations didn't banish humans because they were weak. They buried them because their methods destabilized entire systems. They didn't play by the laws of war. They rewrote them. Kale staggered back. His chest tightened with every word. He wasn't extraordinary. He wasn't even competent in the dome. And yet these records, this curse's legacy, had linked themselves to him. Argus chimed again. Resonance confirmed. Neural markers align with Omega directive operators. Recruit Orion possesses latent capacity for paradox synthesis. Rin's voice trembled. Director, this means he could replicate these strategies. Even without implants, even without training, his mind carries the structure. Valen's jaw clenched. She turned toward the assembly figures. You knew this. You sealed the archives because you feared it would happen again. The lead hologram spoke, words slow, deliberate. The assembly chose survival. After the last war, humanity's methods threatened every order we had built. They weren't conquerors, they were destabilizers. So we erased their legacy, dismantled their systems, and scattered their remnants. Earthborn were reduced to myth-safe, irrelevant. Kale shook his head, voice low, raw. Then why am I here? Why accept me at all? Because Argus never forgets, the voice replied coldly. And if it chose to admit you, it was not error. It was inevitability. The chamber fell into silence once more. Kale's pulse pounded in his ears. He wasn't a cadet who had failed a trial. He was a living echo of a species the galaxy had once feared. A key to strategies buried because they threatened to undo everything civilizations had built. For the first time, Kale saw the fear in their eyes, not of him as a person, but of what he represented. And in that moment, he realized something more terrifying than failure. They weren't debating if he was dangerous. They were deciding if he should be allowed to exist. The chamber's air felt heavy, thick with the weight of what the archives had revealed. Kale stood trembling under the scrutiny of the assembly, Overseer Valen, and Rin Talvek. Every gaze pressed on him like a verdict waiting to be delivered. One of the assembly figures broke the silence. Theory is meaningless without proof. If this recruit carries resonance with the Omega protocols, he must demonstrate it. Rin's brow furrowed. Demonstrate? He barely survived a basic trial? Which is precisely why the test is necessary, the figure replied. If the archives are correct, his methods will surface regardless of training. Kale's voice cracked. I already failed once. What if I fail again? Valen's eyes held his. Then we close the archive and dismiss the anomaly. But if Argus is right, she let the implication hang, the weight of it heavier than any command. The guards ushered him back into the combat dome. This time the simulation chamber shifted, expanding into a battlefield that dwarfed anything he had seen before. Entire fleets shimmered into existence, dozens of warships, tactical ground divisions, planetary defenses layered across a holographic sky. It was the kind of scenario cadets only faced in their final year, not on their first day. Joran Keth's voice carried from the observation deck, sharp with mockery but laced with unease. Watch the Earthborn trip over his own shadow again. Kale's hands shook as the command interface blinked alive. Symbols and tactical icons danced across the field, overwhelming in their complexity. He didn't understand half the systems, didn't know the weapon classifications or the fleet hierarchies. Yet something inside him stirred a strange clarity beneath the chaos. The first wave launched, enemy ships advancing in perfect formation. Kale's instincts screamed to retreat, but another voice, quiet, unfamiliar, almost mathematical, whispered a different path. His hands moved without conscious thought, drawing connections no one else could see. Instead of countering fire with fire, he shifted resources into loops of false data, redirecting enemy signals back into their own command lines. Fleets wavered. Enemy ships adjusted positions against threats that weren't there, breaking their flawless formations. The assembly murmured. Rin leaned forward, disbelief etched across his face. He's destabilizing their logic nets. He isn't fighting them, he's collapsing them from the inside. Kale pressed further, layering contradictions into the system. An enemy cruiser fired on its own wing. A supply convoy rerouted into hostile territory without orders. Within minutes, the massive armada dissolved into chaos. The simulation marked victory, not through overwhelming power, but through the implosion of enemy coordination. Argus spoke, voice cutting through the stunned silence. Simulation complete. Result, 100% success. Duration, 14 minutes. The dome went still. Cadets stared wide-eyed. Joran's smirk had vanished, replaced by disbelief. The overseer's lips parted slightly, her composure finally cracking. One assembly figure exhaled slowly. The archives were right, the paradox remains. Kale lowered his trembling hands, his chest heaving. He hadn't understood what he had done, only that it had felt inevitable, as if the patterns were waiting for him to uncover. And in that moment, he realized the fear in the room was no longer about possibilities. It was about proof. The dome emptied into silence, but the echoes of Kale's impossible victory rippled far beyond the academy walls. Within an hour, the Orion Assembly convened again, their forms projected, larger, sharper, urgency etched across every voice. A real conflict was unfolding in the Outer Rim, two coalitions locked in a war that had already consumed entire systems. Negotiations had failed. Armies had mobilized. Collapse loomed. Director Valen spoke first. "We cannot ignore this." His simulation mirrored archived paradox deployments with alarming precision. One assembly figure hesitated. "Simulations are not wars." Rin Talvek cut him off, voice unsteady but firm. "Then, let's find out." The chamber lights dimmed as a live data stream filled the air fleets in motion, weapons systems primed, thousands of lives hanging in the balance. Argus pulsed brighter than Kale had ever seen. Its voice was calm, deliberate. "Protocol transfer initialized. Subject Orion, provide directive." Kale's throat tightened. His hands trembled as he faced the console. I don't even know what to say." Argus answered him. "You already know. Do not command weapons. Command patterns." Closing his eyes, Kale let the patterns unfold. His fingers moved across the interface, weaving contradictions through the live feed. Enemy fleets redirected, supply lines misinterpreted, orders cascaded into chaos. Within minutes, ships that had prepared to fire were retreating in confusion, their targeting systems compromised by their own logic. A message blinked across the feed. "Ceasefire agreement initiated." Gasps erupted in the chamber. The assembly stared in disbelief as the battlefield calmed. Hours of bloodshed had been halted by a protocol whispered through an Earthborn recruit's trembling hands. Rin whispered, almost to himself, 14 minutes in simulation, 43 minutes in reality, and an entire war unraveled. Valen's gaze lingered on Kale, sharp and unreadable. "The galaxy just changed, and it changed because of you." The assembly's debate turned frantic. Some demanded Kale be protected, others insisted he be contained. Words like asset and weapon were thrown around as if he were not standing in the room, listening to his own fate discussed. Finally, Argus interrupted, its tone absolute. "Directive complete. Earthborn status updated. Educational opportunity. Maximum potential benefit." The designations scrolled across every console, every display, sealing the classification with an unbreakable stamp. Kale was no longer unfit, no longer irrelevant. He was something far more dangerous, proof of a legacy the galaxy had tried to erase. Joran Keth stood among the cadets in silence, his mockery stripped away, his expression caught between fear and resentment. The same boy he had laughed at hours earlier now carried the weight of wars in his hands. Kale lifted his gaze, the reality sinking in. He hadn't earned this with skill or triumph. He hadn't asked for it. But now, wherever he walked, whispers would follow. Not of failure, not of weakness, of the Earthborn threat level Omega.